The Apprentice. Written and read by Ken Johnson. Episode 3. On the other side of the street from the railway station, in the middle of Rosentyre, stood the village's finest pub, the King's Unicorn. The building dated back to some year in the 19th century, at which time it was called the King's Field, and it served cheap beer, blended whisky, smoked fish and hot beef stew with dumplings to a small clientele of porters, shunters, engine drivers, ticket collectors and train passengers. The pub had now, as they say, been reimagined, refurbished, given a new name, roof, central heating system and sign on the street outside. Theodore alighted from the last train of the day, dragging his suitcase packed with things he needed, like socks and a bottle opener, and things his mum wanted him to have just in case, like window cleaning fluid. Eternally a train spotter, he stood, mesmerised on the platform and watched the signal turn green, the carriage doors hiss shut, and the red tail lights of the train shrink into the distance and disappear around a curve. Theodore left the station as someone was switching off the lights. Many years of watching television programmes had convinced Theo that, in a small town, the only way to become accepted, to hear people say good morning to him as they passed him on the street, or to lend him a couple of teaspoons of Nescafe if he ran out of it, was to drink in the same public house as everyone else, and that was the King's Unicorn, opposite the station entrance. Standing on the street in the evening chill, Theodore steeled himself to deal with the hostile reception which, he thought, probably awaited every newcomer. This was the only way to become a full member of the village in good standing, rather than a foreigner and an intruder. He took a deep breath, opened the heavy hardwood door, hoped that the first time would be the worst, and walked gingerly into the bar. The room was large, warm, light, and full of people without being crowded. The people did not look in his direction, hold its collective breath, and fall silent. No fights broke out. Nobody yelled abuse at him. The conversations continued. In the corner, two old men carried on playing draughts, and the barman pulled pints. "What may I get you, sir?" "Brown ale, please." The barman put a bottle and a glass in front of Theo and nipped the cap off the bottle. £2.90. Theodore poured the beer into the glass and carried it over to a bookcase at the other side of the room, where a handwritten notice said, "Please take a book." As he looked along the shelves, the ebony mirror, his and her rules, the mathematics of guesswork, Leviathan among the seers, grasses and crustaceans. He heard a Tyneside accent that he recognised, saying, "Take the black one on the right." "Gresham, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Gresham was a short man, slender, darker skinned than many, the progeny of 7 generations of coal miners and locomotive engineers. "I am steeling myself for another week of stoking the refrigerators, shoeing weasels, ploughing the marshmallow fields, and getting covered from head to foot in pigswill. Such is the fate of your lonely employee at the Sunlight Historic Agricultural Implement Company." Gresham pointed to a well-worn and scruffy black paperback that looked as though it had passed through many hands. "Read that, it'll fascinate you, I guarantee it." Theo pulled the book off the shelf. It did not look like a riveting read. "Why? It doesn't look so interesting that I need to read it before anything else." "Bring it over here and come and sit with me, Horatio. I hate drinking alone, but if I stop, I won't consume my recommended daily alcohol intake, and then I'll die of beer deficiency by about Wednesday. What are you doing here? Just back from spending the holiday weekend at my mum's, and I've been on the train since lunchtime. Well, now you're back, and after you've taken a long swig of the brown ale, you ought to start reading that book, because the author was the driving force. Shh! Don't spoil the surprise, Gresham. Theodore settled down, opened the book and began to read. Small-Scale Warfare. The Lessons of David and Goliath by Professor Daniel Newman. What has this to do with me? Theo asked. Quite a lot, you'll see. Chapter 1. Strength is Weakness. It is said that someone asked the great theoretical physicist Albert Einstein what weapons would be used to fight the Third World War. According to legend, he replied, I know not with what weapons the Third World War will be fought, but the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones. Einstein's opinion was widely shared, although later commentators have cast doubt on the authenticity of the quotation. I think on the whole, Theo ruminated, I'd prefer to take home Leviathan Among the Seers. If you walk here for long enough, you'll read it sooner or later. There's little enough else to do here. And Leviathan Among the Seers is tosh, by the same author that wrote The Prey with Two Faces. Gruesome, thanks for warning me, Theo said, mentally adding that there was indeed nothing else to do, if you didn't count going to the pub and drinking. Except gone to the pub and drink, Gresham said out loud, and you're already doing that. Theo opened the paperback and read. Before 2 atomic bombs were dropped, one on Hiroshima and the other on Nagasaki, the extent of the destruction which the bombs would wreak was universally underestimated. In 1945, for instance, George Orwell, writing in an essay entitled You and the Atom Bomb, imagined an atom bomb dropping on the stock exchange in London and life in the capital continuing as normal afterwards. Once 2 atomic bombs had been dropped, it became clear that the truth was much closer to that later envisaged by Douglas Adams. There was no conceivable consequence of not setting the bomb off that was worse than the known consequence of setting it off. In other words, the atomic bomb was a useless weapon. Despite the huge amounts spent on designing, developing and testing bigger and better atomic bombs, none has been dropped in anger since 1945. 2 atomic explosions were sufficient to show that the bomb could never be used again. As soon as the military realized that atomic bombs powerful enough to devastate an entire city were useless in war, they asked the physicists to build a small atomic bomb. Their answer was not that for which they were hoping. It was no. You cannot build a small atomic bomb. You can only build a big one. The bomb must weigh at least the critical mass, or it will not explode. The immediate consequence of this realization is my turn to buy the beers, said Gresham. Another glass? I think I ought to be going home, Theo said, after a little consideration. I haven't slept much. That's a very sensible idea. Gresham upended his glass and drained it. I'll help with the suitcase. I can see it's too heavy for you. Yes, please do, but I live on Nicholson Close, right across town. 7 Nicholson Close, perhaps? Yes, how did you know? I stayed there too when I first arrived. Mrs. McKechnie's still going then? Of course I'll carry the suitcase. You carry the book and try not to get it wet. A quarter of an hour later, they arrived at 7 Nicholson Close. Looks like she's out. Theo made the observation first. Wakandias were late then. Gresham followed Theo upstairs and laid the heavy suitcase down on the floor. Mrs. McKechnie has a boyfriend, I think, said Theo. She's sometimes out until the small hours, and I don't think they have overnight lock-ins at the bingo hall. There isn't a bingo hall? Gresham shook his right arm to get rid of the cramps. And there isn't a night shift at the fish factory, so it's got to be the boyfriend. Lucky woman. There was a pause. Gresham looked as though he might have been wrestling with a difficult decision. Go ahead, said Theo. Say it. I'll read then. Have you ever had a boyfriend? Yes. I went to St. Hubert's University. We all had one, the girls too. I thought you knew. I did. That's why I asked. I think I remember there being a raid or something at St. Hubert's years ago. 2 a.m. on Wednesday the 20th of September 2013. I was lucky. I heard the noise and I hid. There were doors banging, dogs barking, shouts. They took a moment. Dogs barking? Gresham seemed surprised to hear about them. Looking for drugs, were they? Yes, but none of us had any, but only because we didn't know how to get them. Anyway, the proctors took a little time to reach the room I was in. I clambered onto the top of the wardrobe and knelt there, trying to be invisible. The man looked in the wardrobe, but he didn't look up. You're joking. You got away with it. As easy as that. No, it works. Psychology 101. People don't look up when they're searching for something. That's why you can hide up trees. The room was dark. The guy got the door open, turned the light on, glanced around, opened the wardrobe and shut it again, looked under the bed, said sorry, and shut the door behind him. I climbed back down and turned the light off. Mr. Beattie was embarrassed, but apart from that he had a lucky escape. They didn't have anything to arrest him for. He went back to sleep. I went back to Hall's after the noise died down. By the time I woke up, I'd missed a lecture and the newspapers were having a field day. Gresham drew breath. Do you want to sleep together? I think that's a marvellous idea. Yes, when I've had a bath and relaxed. Bring on the bubble bath. It's in the blue bottle. I need lashings of it. All that talk about the raid made me nervous. I didn't worry. They didn't go on midnight raids here. That's a great relief, said Theo. The funny thing is, the man stank of aftershave and cigarette smoke. I swear I could see a faint trace of lipstick as well. He must have been as gay as a midsummer maypole.